Hey everyone, I'm Epion, and today we're doing something a little bit different. I'm doing a video deck tech for you of my Damia Sage of Stone deck. This is the deck that the majority of you will, see on my channel, and it's actually one of my favorite decks to play. So, as sort of an aside, the sort of intro story of this deck, I used to play a lot of what we call $10 Commander Challenge. And if you guys want to know more about that, let me know in the comments. I can do something separate on that so you guys can learn about the format. It's pretty cool, actually, and it's a good way to grow your collection if you're just getting into MTGO. But basically, this was, I had randomed green, blue, black, and this was one of the cards that I didn't ever get to play with in paper, but I was really excited for on MTGO. So I gave it a go. And this deck has actually come a very long way since when I actually built it the first time. Obviously we were dealing with a budget of 10 tickets, but it's one of the decks that I enjoyed playing then, and so I just started evolving it more and more as I played, and as my collection grew, the more $10 Commander challenges we did, the more I played in separate events. So I figured I'd go ahead and do a deck tech so you guys could see what was in here. And so you guys could sort of have a look and see if there was stuff that, you wanted to recommend, that, they're cards that you like and, you'd like to see. So starting off on the blue portion, start with a couple staples. Ponder is obviously great. Being able to look 3 deep, reorganize, and then draw a card is just stupendous. Then we have Preordain. Scry, I would argue, is one of the most powerful abilities on draw spells in Magic. It allows you to really filter and then draw the card. Cyclonic Rift, if you've never played with this card in Commander, it's a blowout the majority of the time that you play it. The overload cost, where you bounce basically every non-land permanent all of your opponent's control and you get to keep yours, especially if you do it on an end step as it's an instant, can just win you the game on the spot. And it's a card that's sort of naughty in Commander. People don't really like it when you do it to them. Then we have Disdainful Stroke. This is actually one of the promos I just got. If you're playing second, this can actually be a really good card. It can help you get caught up a little bit. So, it's a bit of a situational counterspell, and against some decks, it's just flat out dead. But it's something that, it's cheap, and it's a hard counter for those big spells. After that, we have the classic counterspell. You can't beat it. 2 mana, counter target spell. One of my favorite cards in Magic. After that, we have Laboratory Maniac. Now, some of you may have seen this in videos before and wondered, what the hell is this guy for? He doesn't really seem to do much a lot of the time. Well, this guy's sort of a backup plan. As you know, I normally run the Recycle and Null Profusion combo, which you'll see later, but basically you're drawing a ton of cards. And this is a way to protect myself from decking myself the majority of the time. So as long as he's not the very last card or the second to the last card in the library, I could actually play him and then draw myself into the win. So it's sort of a emergency button if I need it. But otherwise, excuse me, a lot of the time he's, a fairly dead guy. After that, we got Aether Adept. This is just another good tempo card. It's something I played with a lot when I was playing in the Zendikar block. I actually had this really cheapy red-blue counter-burn deck, and this was one of the creatures in it, so it's sort of had a special place in my heart since then. After that, we have Dissolve. It's cancel, but it also has Scry on it. And like I said before, I think Scry is one of the more powerful abilities you get, so that's just sort of gravy on top. After that, we have Hinder. This is another sort of naughty no-no card in Commander. A lot of people really hate it. As a matter of fact, people will concede on the spot to Hinder, which can make games a little unfun. But basically, it's a way to tuck your opponent's commander, and that can be pretty dirty a lot of the time. After that, we have Jace. Baby Jace is something that, I don't normally tick up. I'll normally just try and draw 3 cards and call it good. Sometimes he soaks up a little damage, and that's his job. This is mostly a utility card for me. After that, we have Deep Analysis. This is a pretty nice card from an older set. For 4 mana, you get to draw 2. Not great, but the real power is that you get to flash it back for 2 mana and a little bit of life. Well, in Commander, 3 life's not huge, and paying 2 mana to draw 2 cards is actually pretty huge. So it's a great utility card. For 6 mana, draw 4, pay a little life. Not too shabby. After that, we have Foresee, another 4 mana draw spell. This one's going to draw 2, but the catch is that you get to scry 4. So you get to set up your 2 draws and potentially your next 2 draws after that, or bury cards that you don't want and draw some fresh cards. After that, I have Frozen Aether. This is a card I've gone back and forth on, but it ultimately is just a control card. It allows me to deal with some of my opponent's haste threats, and it also acts as a pseudo Stone Rain by making my opponent's lands and its battlefield tapped, so they don't get access to that mana that turn. After that, we have Leyline of Anticipation. You know, people that have been watching my videos will know that this is a card that can just be a house, especially with Damia. The ability to flash in your commander at end of turn is huge, and especially coupled with something like Omniscience or Recycle, Null Profusion, this can just be great. You can just play your whole hand at instant speed and then draw all those cards back, especially in the instance of Null Profusion and Recycle. After that, Venser, Shaper Savant. This is a card that I really love. Venser is one of my favorite cards. He can be a counterspell, he can be a bounce, and he's a beater with flash. You know, so at very worst, you can flash him at end of turn, pseudo Stone Rain your opponent by bouncing a land, and get a 2/2 beater. It also combos very well with something like Deadeye Navigator and allows you to just keep bouncing him to soft counter everything they play. Tamio the Moon Sage. This is one of my favorite planeswalkers. Tap something down, draw cards, and if you can get to that ultimate and you have a counterspell in hand, the game is almost assuredly over, and I've won a few games just off of that alone. Teferi is another great situational creature. You flash him at an end of turn. It basically sets your opponent to everything is sorcery speed, so it sort of acts like your spells can't be countered anymore, which is great. And, you know, for 5 mana, he's a 3/4. That's fair in terms of size, but setting your opponent to sorcery speed is pretty relevant a lot of the time. Then we have Deadeye Navigator. This is another card that people sort of love to hate in Commander. It's a card you see a lot if you have value creatures, which I have a pretty fair amount of. And he'll just win games on his own with another creature because he's so hard to deal with. And this exile and then return ability is very strong, especially for 2 mana. After that, we've got Arcanus. He's just there to draw lots of cards. He's a nice supplement to Damia because I have to skip my draw step. So, you know, it's always nice to be able to just get a free draw 3. And he also has some protection and the ability to bounce to your own hand, which is always nice. After that, we have Dig Through Time. Another new card from Khans of Tarkir. This is a card that just... Delve is very powerful. Digging 7 deep is very powerful. And at instant speed, it's just amazing. And so this was one of the cards I was really excited to play with when Khans came out. After that, it's Big Papa Omniscience. This is a card I was lucky enough to pick up when it was cheap before it really caught on. Being able to play cards for free is obviously huge. It's something that I love doing, and this card wins games all on its own. Syncopate is the last of the mono blue spells. It's just a cheapy counterspell, and if nothing else, you can just hold it up to make them pay 1 to punish them for tapping out. Beyond that, you know, late game it gets to be a little soft, and it just gets to be a mana sink, but at least in the early game it can be pretty good. Moving on to black, we've got Demonic Tutor. Demonic Tutor. Obviously, 2 mana to search your library for a card and put it in your hand is bonkers. It's a card that I just recently was able to pick up, and it's been awesome ever since. Go for the Throat. Obviously, a very good removal spell. 2 mana, destroy non-artifact creature. There's not a lot of artifact creatures roaming around in EDH, so this is normally just hard removal. Ultimate Price is something that has been a bit contentious in my deck. I've switched back and forth between Ultimate Price and Doomblade, and they've each had their moments where they've been great. They've also both had their moments where they've just been very bad. This is probably something that I think I would like to switch for Hero's Downfall if I can pick one up for a reasonable price at some point. So that's probably an upgrade I'd like to make at some point. Vampire Nighthawk is just a good value creature. For 3 mana, having a 2/3 lifelink Death Touch. In late game, if nothing else, he's a Death Touch creature that holds our opponents off attacking us. And the lifelink, especially in the early game, can sometimes be very relevant. We do have shock lands, so being able to play a shock land and then gain it right back is also just very nice. Now we have Erebos, God of the Dead. Not normally a creature in our deck, but he does prevent our opponents from gaining life, which is very relevant in some matchups, especially Oloro, as you guys saw once before. And the ability to pay 2 life and mana to draw a card is huge. This is obviously a deck that loves to draw cards. Bloodline Keeper is another creature that's been in my deck. It feels a little win more sometimes. Being able to drop vampire tokens is not always great. And the transform ability doesn't normally come up. Normally, if it does come up, you're in a win more situation. You're already in the lead, and you are probably going to win anyways. But that being said, this guy uncontested on the board will just win games, and so that's why he's in here. After that, we've got Desecration Demon. Anybody who played Standard when Return to Ravnica was in play will know that this guy is awful to deal with, especially in 1-in-1 games, and he can generate a lot of tempo by just forcing your opponent to deal with him a lot of the time. And even if they can, paying 4 mana for a 6/6 flyer isn't too bad. After that, we've got Increasing Ambition. Nice thing about this is it only costs 1 black. It does cost 5 mana, but you get to search for 1, and then if you play from the graveyard, you get to search for 2. So if you have to play it early on to fetch up, a toolbox piece, a piece of removal, or something to dig for more cards, you can do that. And then later on, you can use it as sort of a haymaker to try and put the game away. After that, we've got Hythonia the Cruel. This is a card not many people play on MTGO. I actually think she's pretty good. For 6 mana, you get a Death Touch. Death Touch is obviously very good a lot of the time. 4/6, and if you Monstrosity her, it destroys all non-Gorgon creatures, which means she's safe to play with our commander out, and it's just going to wrath everything else. My creature gets bigger, you lose all your stuff. There's not a lot of other Gorgons really seeing play, so this is normally just a one-sided wrath a lot of the time. After that, we got Null Profusion. This is one of our sort of cute combo cards. Skip your draw step, you get to draw a card, maximum hand size is 2. You can obviously get around the maximum hand size of 2 with other cards like Reliquary Tower, so you can just keep playing basically endlessly and never have to discard down to 2. Massacre Worm is one of my favorite cards in the whole deck. The -2/-2 when it enters the battlefield can be huge, and even if that's not, that anytime an opponent's creature dies, they lose 2 life, means you get that incremental life loss, which can be very relevant in a lot of matchups. So this is a card I've always enjoyed playing with when it was in Standard, and now that I was able to pick it up in Commander, it's also just awesome. After that, we've got a Runescarred Demon. This is another just good value creature. A tutor on a 6/6 flying body. Sign me up. That's about as good as it gets. Black Sun Zenith is really our only Wrath in the deck. We don't have a lot that really hard Wraths our opponent. And for me, this is a card that is just so nice because you can always use it. It shuffles back in, which means you can tutor for it, and then Wrath again if you need to. So it's almost like having Flashback, which is obviously very good. The last card is Diabolic Revelations. This may be a bit of a pet card. It's a card that tends to find its way into a lot of my black EDH decks. I really enjoy it, and in late game, you can basically draw up to a full hand of cards that you hand pick. And I don't know if you've ever done that, but it's very powerful, and it's really nice to do. Starting with our greens, we've got Elvish Visionary. That's another just good value card. 2 mana, you get a 1/1 and draw a card. Nothing wrong with that. Also combos with Deadeye Navigator to just draw you a card for 2 mana every turn. A lot of our green suite is going to be ramp, so we have Farseek. This allows us to fetch up our shock lands and put them directly into play. Rampant Growth allows us to just fix for basics. Sakura Tribe Elder, or Steve as he's known, does the same thing. The nice thing about him is if you're still a little bit flooded on lands, you can always just attack with him in the meantime. And then if they go to kill him or they block, then you can just sack him to get a land, which is always nice. Silvan Library allows us to filter our draw steps a little bit, and in the late game, it can just let us draw additional cards if we need. Especially if we're a little bit ahead in life, but not necessarily ahead on board. This can be a good way to get those extra cards. Beast Within is a great just remove any, destroys planeswalkers, destroys lands, destroys problemsome creatures, artifacts, enchantments. It's just so versatile, and a lot of the time giving them a 3/3 beast in exchange for whatever you destroy is good value for you either way. Next we have Reclamation Sage. This is something that somebody recommended the other day when I was looking through my comments. It's a card I had actually forgotten about in the meantime. I bought it for another deck, and so I ended up subbing out my Naturalize. Ironically, I was playing against a deck the other day, and I got a Reclamation Sage, and I couldn't actually kill the enchantment I needed to because I couldn't get Enter the Battlefield effects. So one thing to note about this, I feel like that was a pretty small, narrow situation where Reclamation Sage is just worse than something like Naturalize, but ultimately this can just be, you know, a value creature or just a beater if you need somebody to absorb damage or deal a little bit extra. Cultivate, more ramp, lets us take cards out of our library, puts one into play, one into hand, so we make sure we hit our next turn's land drop as well. That's very important for us. Fairhaven Elf, again, another creature that enters the battlefield. It thins our deck out and it ramps us a little bit. Just a good value creature for us in general. Crowson Grip. This is sort of our second Naturalized type card. Destroy artifact or enchantment. But for the 1 extra mana, we get Split Second, which is huge. It allows you to deal with cards like Sensei's Divining Top, which I don't know if you ever tried to kill one of those. Very hard to do. Most players just put them back on the top of their library, so it requires multiple removal spells or something with Split Second. After that, we've got Yavimaya Elder. Another card that when it dies, we get to take lands out of our library, thin our library. It also is a card that, you know, if you can go ahead and attack with him. If he's going to die, you can just sack him anyways, get the 2 lands, and also draw a card. So, just a nice bit of value, ultimately. Oracle of Moldiah. I know this is sort of contentious with Courser of Kruphix, but I tend to like Oracle of Moldiah better. I like being able to get the additional land drop. This card can just be sweet, playing a couple lands off the top every turn. The life gain, you know, that you get with Courser can be nice, but being able to ramp at the same time can just be huge with Oracle. So that's why I normally use this one. It also only requires single green. You'll notice that the majority of my green cards require only single green, so it allows my blue and my black to be a little bit more color intensive. Next card is Thrag Tusk. This guy was awesome when he was standard. He had a huge price spike. Now obviously he doesn't see much play anywhere. Ultimately Commander though, 5 mana for a 5/3 that gains you 5 and it leaves behind a token when it dies. Pretty good value, especially because it says leaves the battlefield, which means if you bounce it with Deadeye Navigator, you do get a token every time, and you get your 5 life. Acidic Slime, another toolbox card. This is something that allows us to just deal with troublesome lands, artifacts, and enchantments, and it leaves behind a Death Touch body. Stinglash Spider is sort of a weird card. Not a lot of people understand why it's in here. Initially, when I built this deck, it had a very bad problem with flyers. Basically, if our opponent landed a flyer and we couldn't deal with it efficiently, that was it. The flyer was just going to get in there every turn, and we were just going to, have to quickly find a way to deal with it or lose. This Hurricane ability can be awesome. There's definitely games where this has been the card that saved my butt. Having reach and having that Hurricane is huge sometimes. So this guy isn't somebody that I see in my hand a whole lot that I'm like, oh, what an all-star. He's no Massacre Worm. But it's something that I can fetch up in a situation and just have it be good when I need it to be. Lastly is Recycle. Recycle was the original printing, and Null Profusion was the time-shifted version where they changed the color and it's the same functional card. This allows us to, combo out, draw a lot of cards, play a lot of cards, and it's something that, having Null Profusion and Recycle may be overkill sometimes. I know I've gotten both into play at the same time, and that's been a bit of shenanigans, but it's definitely a fun combo when you can get it working the way you want. So moving on to our multicolor cards, obviously not many. The charms are just great. This is one of my favorite. It allows you to regenerate your creatures. That's not a mode that I find that I use a whole lot, but destroy target enchantment and -1/-1 until end of turn is very nice. The enchantment removal is great at instant speed. A little bit more narrow than something like, say, Naturalize at 2 mana, but all creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn does mean that it deals with token strategies fairly well, so it's a nice fetch up. Putrefy, something that allows us to deal with artifacts and also with creatures, and the fact that they can't be regenerated is huge. Just a good value card a lot of the time. Gaze of Granite is one of the cards in my deck that not many people see coming, and that's part of why I love it so much. Most people just aren't prepared for this type of Wrath effect where I get to just choose the converted mana cost and destroy everything beneath it. And because a lot of my creatures and things like that typically have high mana costs, this can just be a blowout, especially against tokens. 3 mana to destroy all tokens can be a huge tempo swing. So that's obviously very nice. Glowing Oracle sort of fills the same role as Elvish Visionary. Basically 2 mana, 1/1, draw a card if it's not a land, or if it's a land, put it into play. Ultimately just another value creature, and it's an early play that a lot of the time ends up hitting the bin because he's a blocker. Soultide Charms is obviously one of the new ones. One thing that I do like about it is it gives us the ability to destroy artifacts or enchantments. It also acts like an ultimate price, and if need be, we can use it to draw cards. Drawing 2 and then discarding a card means it was a 2 for 2, which isn't great, but I end up finding that the destroy monocolored creature and the artifact or enchantment is more relevant most of the time. So this is a card I've actually really enjoyed since I've added it to the deck. A lot of versatility. Moving on to the artifacts in the deck, we've got Gilded Lotus. Just a great card for Commander. If you can get it to stick, the extra 3 mana can just be huge. And on turn 5, it's always nice to be able to play something like Gilded Lotus and still be able to hold up like a counter spell or a piece of removal because you have that 3 mana instantly available. Relic of Progenitus is sort of my concession to graveyard strategies. I find that sometimes, because of the way I deal with creatures, graveyard strategies can be a big problem, that I'll just destroy something and they'll just return it to the battlefield, and you know, I just ended up basically discarding a card and not doing much to them really. So it also is kind of nice because you know, you can pay a total of 2 mana into it and draw a card. So it's sort of like a colorless think twice in that way, which can always be nice. After that, we've got Chromatic Lantern, just mana smoothing. Sometimes the mana in my deck isn't totally great, but this is definitely something that helps smooth it out when I need it. And it's a bit of ramp, you know, paying 3 gets us 1 more mana, and it allows us to just adjust our colors however we need. Darksteel Ingot, obviously just the 3 mana indestructible. A lot of people like to destroy things like mana rocks and rampant artifacts, so this one can be particularly hard to deal with, and it makes any color. Just a strict upgrade from the Manolith that I used to have in here. And obviously Solem, Simulacrum, huge value creature. For 4 mana, you're getting a land, you're getting a 2/2, and when he dies, you're drawing a card. That's just awesome value. This guy basically finds his way into almost every one of my decks because it's just so nice to get all of that out of 1 card. That's basically all my spells and everything in the main deck. Moving on to the lands. I know this is kind of the boring part. We have Windswept Heath, Polluted Delta, and Bloodstained Mire. Got a little ahead of myself. In there in terms of fetches, they obviously thin out your library a little bit, and they allow you to fetch up things like shock lands and alpha beta dual lands, which is obviously very nice, especially just for 1 life to fetch up an alpha beta dual land is huge. This whole category is basically just my fixing lands. So you've got Command Tower, any color mana, doesn't enter the battlefield tapped. Awesome. Overgrown Tomb. You know, it's obviously a swamp and a forest, which is, you know, a combo with things like Farseek and our other fetches. It's also, because of that archetype, turns on things like Hinterland Harbor or Woodland Cemetery, things like that. Speaking of Woodland Cemetery, here it is. Obviously, it gets turned on by any of the basics and a lot of our shocks. Jungle Holo, just a bit of fixing, and it gains us 1 life. The life is not normally relevant, but having a dual land, you know, is always helpful. Golgari Guildgate, strictly worse than the Holo. This is a card that I would like to replace eventually one day with something like Bayou, because obviously Bayou is a huge upgrade. After that, we've got all of our green-blue dual lands. These all fill basically the same purposes. Breeding Pool, Forest Island, can be fetched up, Farseek combo, and it also turns on those check lands like Hinterland Harbor. After that, we've got Thornwood Falls, gain a life, a little bit of fixing, Simic Guildgate. Again, strictly worse, something I'd prefer to have Tropical Island for. Don't have it yet. Watery Grave, same thing as Overgrown Tomb and Breeding Pool. It's going to allow us to fetch it up, Farseek, and it's going to turn on our check lands. Drowned Catacomb, another check land. Darkslick Shores is actually taking the place of the Damir Guildgate in here because it actually enters the battlefield untapped during the first couple turns, which can be color intensive for blue and black. So this was a nice little pickup. After that, we've got Dismal Backwater. A little bit of fixing, gain 1 life, not too shabby. And then obviously one of the new tri-lands, Opulent Palace, gives us access to all 3 lands, or all 3 colors, and enters battlefield tapped. In terms of utility lands, I have Shizo, the Death Storehouse. It's basically a swamp in function. It doesn't enter the battlefield tapped or anything, but it does give fear to my legendary creatures. There's not many, but it sort of acts like an alternate win condition. I can always give fear to my legendaries so that they can get in uncontested against some decks. So it's just a strict upgrade from a basic swamp most of the time. Yavimaya Holo, a great little utilitarian card. Regenerating target creature for this and 1 green can be huge a lot of the time. Allows some infinite blockers, and also combos nicely with a lot of our Death Touch creatures, allowing them to get multiple uses. And then last but not least, Reliquary Tower, something that tends to be a staple in Commander. It also combos very nicely with Recycle and Null Profusion. For those of you that don't know, you could play Null Profusion or Recycle and then play Reliquary Tower afterwards. You'd basically timestamp your hand size so that it would apply down to 2 and then no maximum after that. And so you would never have to discard down to 2. And it's actually a lot of fun when you can get it to work out like that. After that, we just have our basics. Oop, this swamp got a little out of place. There, now he's back with his friends. We're just running 6 forests, 6 islands, and 5 swamps. Nothing too excited there. In terms of what I would like to change to the deck in the future, I really would like to get Underground Sea. I'd like to get Tropical Island. I'd like to get Bayou. All of those would be strict upgrades from some of the lands that I have in my deck already. I'd also would like to get something like Verdant Catacombs and Misty Rainforest so I could have some other fetches. Fetches tend to just, you know, really help out a lot of the time. They thin your deck a little bit of lands. They also add to the graveyard for things like Dig Through Time, which can be valuable. I'd also like cards like Hero's Downfall, which would be a strict upgrade. One of the comments that I got actually a couple weeks ago was about Villainous Wealth, which I actually checked into a little bit. I ended up not loving it. I'm trying to remember what I took out. I think it was Frozen Aether, which I'm sort of so-so on anyways. And it felt like I was paying a lot into it, and against some decks I just didn't get anything. It just ended up being sort of crappy, and I would have rather have had the other mana. It also doesn't combo well with something like Omniscience. I just have to pay the mana every time. So it was something that I looked into. I still may try and find a home for it in the deck. But anyhow, that's the makeup of my Damia Sage of Stone deck. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I know that doing a deck tech is not something that I normally do, but I thought maybe this would be something that you guys would like. So if you did, you know, obviously leave the video a like. Let me know in the comments what you think of this layout for the deck. If there's cards that you think may just be better, they're strict upgrades. You know, I know like things like Force of Will are obviously awesome. Mana Drain is awesome. You know, I don't have access to all the cards in the world, but you know, I would like to know if you guys see some cards in here that you think maybe can be improved. So, you know, let me know in the comments. And as always, if you're not a subscriber to my channel, you know, please subscribe. I would really like that, and I hope to bring you more great content. But until next time, this is Epion, signing off.